All right, today we are diving into something huge. We're going to tackle the deep problems that have tripped up Bible readers for, well, forever. We're talking about the stuff that makes people just put the book down.
So have you ever been reading the Bible and just thought, what is going on here? I mean, really, if you've ever felt that way, you are definitely not alone. It can seem so contradictory, so violent, and honestly, just plain weird sometimes, right? From bizarre laws to some really troubling commands, it's packed with things that just don't sit right with us today.
Okay, so let's just be real about it. Let's look at some of these deep problems head on, because there are some genuinely tough questions that pop up over and over when you really try to engage with this text.
And look, these aren't just little plot holes we can gloss over. We're talking about the big stuff. Why does the God of the Old Testament seem so violent? If God's good, why is there so much evil in the world? What's the deal with all these supernatural creatures? And what are we even here for? You know, the typical answers we might have gotten as kids, they just don't really hold up. It can leave you feeling like the whole thing is just a jumbled, incoherent mess.
But what if the problem isn't actually the Bible itself? What if the problem is us? I mean, what if we're trying to read this ancient collection of texts through a completely modern lens, a lens the original writers and readers would never have recognized? What if we're missing the key, the one piece of context that makes it all click into place?
And that brings us to this idea of a lost cosmic worldview. It's something scholars have been piecing back together, a perspective that was totally normal, like second nature to the people who wrote the Bible, but it's been almost totally forgotten by us.
It's called the Divine Council Worldview. Okay, think about it like this. Back in the ancient world, every king had a council, right? A group of advisors, governors, people to help run the kingdom. Well, this worldview just takes that idea and applies it to the heavens. It imagines a cosmos where God isn't acting alone, but presides over this heavenly staff, a council of spiritual beings, and he delegates real authority, real jobs to them, and to us. When you see it that way, the entire biblical story suddenly transforms into a drama of cosmic rebellion and conflict, a war in the heavens, really.
And the difference between our view and this ancient one is huge. It's night and day. We tend to see the spiritual world as really flat, you know? There's God way up there, and then there's us down here, and that's about it. But this ancient worldview sees it as a busy, dynamic, populated place. It's not a simple play with just two characters. It's this massive cosmic drama with a whole cast of players, both divine and human.
All right, so that's the theory. But how does this lens actually help? Well, let's put it to the test. Let's take some of those really tough questions we started with and see what happens when we look at them through this new, or really old, perspective. And we have to start with the big one, right? The violence, especially in the Old Testament. Those conquest stories in books like Joshua, the commands to wipe out entire groups of people, that is a massive, massive stumbling block for pretty much any modern reader.
But this Divine Council worldview totally reframes what's going on. It says the conflict isn't about ethnicity at all. It's theological. The violence isn't random. It's aimed at very specific places the text describes as spiritual strongholds of evil, like the headquarters for these rebel divine powers. So the war isn't genocide, it's a targeted strike to reclaim cosmic territory from hostile spiritual forces that have taken over.
Okay, puzzle number 2, the problem of evil. It's the age-old question, isn't it? If God is good and all-powerful, then why is there so much suffering? Where does all this injustice come from?
Well, the Divine Council answer goes right back to that idea of delegated authority. See, God set up a world where his council members and humanity had real freedom, real responsibility. Evil wasn't part of the original plan. It crashed the party when both divine beings and humans misused their freedom and chose to rebel. So in this picture, God isn't the one creating evil. Nope. He's the one fighting against it, working to take back a creation that's been hijacked by these rebellious forces.
All right, let's talk about the weird stuff. All those supernatural beings that pop up. Angels, demons, the sons of God, principalities and powers. What are all these things? It can just feel like a confusing jumble of fantasy creatures.
But what's crazy is that the Divine Council framework gives us a surprisingly neat and tidy org chart for the spiritual world. For instance, angel isn't a type of being, it's a job description. It just means messenger. The sons of God, those are the members of God's heavenly council. Demons, the text points to them being the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, those giants from Genesis 6, the offspring of rebel council members and human women. And those principalities? Those are the rebel gods, the council members who were supposed to oversee the nations after Babel but went rogue. All of a sudden, boom, it's not a mess anymore. There's an actual coherent structure.
And here's the thing. This isn't just about making sense of weird Old Testament stories. This worldview radically reshapes how we understand the core message of the entire New Testament, the gospel. When you see it this way, the whole Bible becomes one epic, 5-act cosmic story. Act 1. God creates a good world and delegates authority. Act 2. Rebellion. Both his heavenly crew and his human partners go off the rails. Act 3. Conflict. The whole cosmos becomes this contested, enemy-occupied territory. Act 4. Reclamation. This is where Jesus comes in. His life, death, and resurrection aren't just a moral lesson. They are the D-Day invasion, the decisive victory that breaks the back of the enemy powers. Which leads to Act 5, restoration, the slow but certain reestablishment of God's perfect kingdom over all of creation.
So you see, the gospel is so much bigger than just a personal get-out-of-jail-free card. It's not about escaping a burning building. It's a declaration of cosmic victory. It's the story of the rightful king returning to reclaim his entire creation, every square inch of it, spiritual and physical, from the rebel forces that tried to steal it.
Okay, so why does this matter? I mean, who cares about some ancient, dusty worldview? Well, it matters because it actually gives us real, substantial answers to our very modern questions and problems with the text.
For one, it lets us face those tough questions with intellectual honesty instead of just falling back on cliches. It takes the Bible from being a confusing pile of stories and turns it into one single, epic narrative that actually makes sense. It gives us a real way to think about spiritual conflict. It reminds us of our purpose as God's partners, his imagers here on earth. And, maybe most importantly, it gives us a vision of the gospel that is just so much bigger and more exciting than we thought.
And that really leaves us with one last question to chew on. We spend so much energy trying to force these ancient texts to make sense in our world, to fit into our modern boxes. But what would happen if we flipped that? What if, instead, we made the effort to understand their world first? What kind of depth, what kind of coherence, what kind of epic story might we find waiting for us if we just tried?